Hello, hello. Happy Friday and welcome. Welcome to Intentional Conversations, a virtual community podcast. We're going to give it just a second to allow all of our community members who are joining us today to get settled into this virtual space. I am Dr. Nika White. My pronouns are she, her, and I am so delighted to welcome each of you to today's podcast. Let me also share not only happy Friday, but happy Earth Day. We do want to recognize that as well. As you join, please feel free to find the chat and introduce yourselves. Let us know where you're joining the conversation from. It's always a treat for us to know where people are joining live from. And if you feel inclined, certainly share other information about yourself. Maybe even drop your LinkedIn information into the chat. That's your way of letting us know that you're interested in connecting with this community beyond this hour of time. And we love that. So I'm seeing Dallas is represented today, Columbia, South Carolina, Columbus, Ohio, OKC, South Carolina, Lexington, Kentucky, Spartanburg, South Carolina. We are actually based in South Carolina. And so we always appreciate seeing folks from our home state, although we are a 100% remote work organization. I see Washington represented as well, and Amsterdam. Amsterdam is in the house. So welcome everyone. So yes, if you're just joining us, we would like for you to take a moment to locate the chat and let us know where you're joining the conversation from and any other information you desire to share with this community. Today is Earth Day. We have acknowledged that. I also want you all to know that part of our way of showing up for the broader community of learners who find value in this Intentional Conversations podcast is to ensure we are practicing good disability justice. And so we do have the closed caption feature that's enabled for your benefits. So I want to make sure that you are aware of that. I also would like to recognize my team who are working behind the scenes, and they do an incredible job week after week, making sure that the virtual production aspect of today's and every week's podcast is seamless. And I'm so grateful to have an astute team that's always in place, ready to serve, ready to help make sure this experience is great for each of us. So I'm going to jump right in because as per usual, every week we have such tremendous guest co-hosts, and I do not want to delay an opportunity for you to be able to meet today's special guest co-host. And so again, this is Intentional Conversations, a virtual community podcast. Welcome. We're so glad you're here. Okay, so let's jump right in. One of the things that I often like to do at the start of the hour is to provide some information that hopefully you will find valuable. We want you to know that we are taking Intentional Conversations VodCast, and we're also providing a podcast option. And so do not fret for those of you who have been accustomed to joining us live so that you can hear the information firsthand and to engage directly with this community. You will continue to have that opportunity, but we're also just adding on the podcast, so that for those individuals who like to get their information and their content in the podcast manner, they will have a chance to also be privy to the wonderful and useful and insightful information that we share week after week. So I wanted to put that into your hearing. Please share the word. As always, we like to take a moment just to acknowledge what's coming up by way of our guest co-host for future weeks. And so Kwabena Collins is going to be joining us on Friday, April 29th. Kwabena has been a routine visitor for our podcast community, so we welcome him to be front and center on April 29th. And in that Intentional Conversations podcast, we will be discussing the main components to consider when developing and implementing a DEI strategy. So look forward to that Intentional Conversation podcast. And then following that week on Friday, May the 6th, we have Lisa Galopter, who's going to be joining, and she's going to be talking about organizational equity through the employee life cycle, specifically how the Great Resignation is more like the Great Reveal. Don't you like that? Great Resignation, Great Reveal. We're learning a lot from what we're seeing from people during this time, and also what employees need from their workplaces. And so certainly anticipate that being an enlightening conversation. And then following May 6th, the next Friday, May 13th, we have my friend, Dr. Shelton Good, joining us. And we're going to be talking about DEI efforts that yield measurable and sustainable results. And also DEI in a post-COVID world. Is it really a post-COVID world? Maybe in some regards, but we'll hear about that when Dr. Shelton Good will join us on May 13th. So I hope you'll mark all those dates and join us to be a part of those conversations. Now, it does me great pleasure to welcome today's special guest co-host. I look forward to being in conversation with her. And her name is Olanike, A. Mensah, and I'm so excited. And let me, as I normally do, give a formal introduction of Olanike. Olanike is a workplace equity strategist and executor rolled into one. She is experienced in applying an equity, diversity, and inclusion, EDI for short, lens to all aspects of workplace management. She has applied her organizational development and leadership skills in both the nonprofit and business corporate sectors, spending nearly 20 years leading local, national, and international organizations. Olanike has deep leadership experience in educational institutions, including schools and nonprofits and non-government organizations. Her experience living on 2 continents gives her a unique global lens that enriches her perspective. She is passionate about the workplace equity and leadership development. Olanike founded Mosaic Consulting about 6 years ago, where she offers training, coaching, and consulting to individuals, as well as institutions seeking transformation. She partners with clients to achieve greater workplace equity via strategies unearthed through facilitating complex dialogue and bolstered by change leadership principles. She is obsessed with building equity in the world, starting with the workplace. And so VodCast community, for those of you who join us week after week, you know what to do. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so I can spotlight Olanike for the conversation today. Let us help her feel welcome in the chat by whatever words that you feel like will allow her to know that we are so excited to be in conversation with her. Olanike, thank you for saying yes to our invite. Thank you for being here. And I just want to open it up and give you a chance to greet this audience in your own way. And typically what we like to share is information that maybe I did not capture from reading your bio, your credentials, and your accolades. And so welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I love to be in conversation with awesome, wonderful people. I love your work. And so thank you for having me. And hello, welcome, and hi, and hello to everybody in the chat. My chat screen is over here. So I think you wanted me to share like things you might not know about me from my bio.
Yes.
I love to karaoke. I love music. I love dancing. I love singing. I'm a choir kid. I love plantain.
Oh.
And there was a fun exchange on LinkedIn recently about like diagonal slicing of plantain. Like if you're an adult and you make fried plantain and you don't slice it diagonally, I'm gonna need you to find a YouTube video and figure it out. It's like, slice it diagonally.
I love that, school us, yeah, school us.
So, but other than that, let me share some like intersecting identities, because that's a lot of what we're gonna talk about today. And I'm sorry, I keep leaning in and out because I move a lot when I'm talking, and so my lighting is shifting on us here. But yeah, I identify as a Black cis het woman. Ethnically, I'm Nigerian. I'm Nigerian American, which is a result of being born in the States, but then moving to Nigeria when I was 2 years old and being raised there. Nigeria is in West Africa. Being raised there until I was 10 years old. So from 5th grade on, I was back in the States, in Ohio, actually. So I'm a Midwesterner. And so I've lived a very hybrid life, and that's another intersection. You know, everywhere I went in Cincinnati was America. Once I entered my house, I was in Nigeria. So that came with its own set of realities. I am currently living in Ghana, so I just Black-sitted. So you don't, that's not in my bio.
Oh wow!
It was unexpected. It was unexpected. It wasn't planned, but last summer we moved to Ghana. Now I'm bouncing back and forth a lot, but My family, my daughter goes to school here now. My husband works here. So this is our base, even though I'm back and forth for different reasons. And yeah, I just, if you follow me on LinkedIn, I just kind of also publicly announced that I identify as neurodivergent, even though I don't like that language, because it's like divergent from what? And why is that normal and everything else not normal? That's a whole nother, that's a soapbox. And it's very, very new. So I exploring what all that means for me and my work and all of that. But it is already sort of helping me understand experiences that I've had that I didn't really have a place to put it, to understand it. So yeah.
Great.
That's a bunch of stuff.
It is.
You wouldn't see anywhere else, I think.
No, I love it. It gives us a deeper glimpse into you, Olanike. And so I wanna stay there for a moment. So first and foremost, I think when you accepted our invite, you were not in Ghana. And so I have to ask, what time is it there now?
It's 3:11 p.m.
Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure we didn't have to get you up at just this really ridiculous time to enjoy this conversation. And so no, that's great. And so you mentioned that you recently went public with this news of neurodivergent being part of the intersecting identities that you have. I have a neurodivergent son, and I love what you just mentioned about the wording there, how maybe it's not it's not maybe the ideal language that allows all of us to feel really good about it. And so I want to just kind of dig into that a little bit. And let's start with first and foremost, making sure that this audience is aware of what we mean by neurodivergent.
Yeah, so a neurotypical person would be your brain works in the typical way that society would expect. That's like a simple, like very simple baseline. There's, I can pull up my workshop definition if you want that, but that's what that is. And so neurodivergent in the language that we use now is saying that everyone else is kind of divergent from that neurotypical way. So this can range from diagnosis like autism. It's Autism Awareness Month, right? Yep. So like that's, I think, where people's mind goes immediately. But it can also range into like mental health, like anxiety, diagnosis, and OCD and things like that impact the way that you show up and interact and engage in the world. So it's a spectrum, and so that's what it means to be. It means your brain works.
Yeah. So what got you to the point, Olanike, to where you felt comfortable going public with this? What about your story? Are you open to sharing that with our audience today?
A little. I'm still in the midst of it, but yeah, usually I will overthink myself out of posting things.
Yeah, I think a lot of us do.
And so I just had a moment and I was like, just put it out there, like get it out of your head, put it out there. Yeah. And so, yeah, I think it started with just recognizing that I have extreme anxiety a few years back. And I've always sort of known it because my mother has anxiety. It's prevalent in my family, and we didn't have that language growing up, but as I came into adulthood, I was like, oh yeah, that's what that is. And I noticed it in myself. And I always knew that, but about 5 years ago, I was like, actually, this is like, if this is what's normal level of anxiety, I think I'm like up here. Like this is, like I didn't have the like actual real calibration of like, I don't think this is healthy or normal. And I started getting to the point where I was like asking Google for like medication. And I was like, okay, stop, go see a professional first. So that's how it started. It started with the anxiety, and I think just life being so complicated, but about 5 years ago for me. And the thing that put me over the top was my daughter had a complete emotional meltdown about a school assignment. And I was like, that's not a big deal. Why are you reacting so strongly? And I was like, okay, if I don't go understand this for myself, how am I going to prepare her for the rest of life? So I started going to therapy for myself. I'd always gone for relationships and other things in the past, but that sort of started started the journey to get me to where I am now. So
yeah, no, I so appreciate that. And I'm sure this audience and those who will hear the replay will gain value from your transparency and your vulnerability and willingness to share that. I think part of how we help others heal and support people through navigating the complexity of these experiences that a lot of people are experiencing is to talk about it more often, And so I never like to ask someone to do something that I'm not willing to do myself. And so Olanike, you have also encouraged me in this conversation to say, not only do I have a neurodivergent son, he was diagnosed with OCD. You would not know it unless you were in his inner circle and you lived with him and you saw his process. Otherwise, he presents as like, anyone else. And then as I was listening to you tell your story, mine was very similar in that I noticed there was this pattern in years of, I just did not feel middle of the road. I would have these extreme emotions and it was starting to impact my family. And I remember one day, my son as a little boy, maybe like 5 or 6, said, "Mommy, why are you so angry all the time?" And I broke in that moment. I remember calling my mom and I was just crying. And I said, "I don't know what it is. I don't want to be this way." My mom knew exactly what it was because she had similar situations. So I'm listening to you talk about you and your daughter. And she said, "Honey, I know exactly what that is. This is what you need to do." And I go do it and all is well. And that was like 15, 20 years ago. And now all is well. So anyway, you encouraged me to share my story just because you were willing to share your story. And so thank you. Thank you for that. Okay.
Thank you for sharing your story.
No, thank you. Thank you for inspiring me to do so. So there's so much to talk about today. I want to start with this general question. How do everyday people find their place in DEI work? And when I say everyday people, I'm really talking about the individuals that don't have the title of Chief Diversity Officer, Manager, or even HR professional, but just people that want to be champions of this work. They want to help foster equity, inclusion, and belonging. How can they find their place in doing this work?
Start paying attention to your surroundings, to the people around you. Because I'm willing to bet money, and if anyone wants to pay me, I can send you my bank information, that inequity is at work wherever you are. I don't care what environment it is, what planet, not planet, well, guess what planet you're on, what continent you're on, country, city. Inequity and injustice is a part of the global story, the global human story. So It's present. So if you want to get involved and you're like, I don't know where or how, I say focus on your immediate surroundings. And then just like figure out where you have influence. Some of us don't have authority or power in the spaces that we find ourselves, but we may have influence. And so once you figure out what it is that's playing out around you, and you can identify where you have authority, if you have it, or power, it's another way of describing that, like power to actually say, we're going to do it this way, and then it gets done that way. Or if you have influence on those that have the power and authority to say, we're going to do it this way and then do it this way, that's your starting point. And then I think the other thing that I'll say is that you definitely don't need to have a title other than being a human being and wanting to see greater humanity, like be a thing.
I so love that. That is a message that I amplify as well, because my experience has been that there are a number of people that if you were to engage them at their core, they can certainly articulate the value of diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging. But that does not translate necessarily into their actions, and that they're passive about it. And so in my mind, I feel like that's such a missed opportunity if we don't encourage people to realize that this is not about having a title or a position. It is about whatever sphere of influence that you have, which could be in your home, your communities, and the workplace with your team. And so don't sit on the sidelines because you're waiting and expecting someone else to own this work, because this work belongs to all of us. All of us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I also like to tell people to just start asking questions.
Yes, exactly. Curiosity.
Especially if you're new to this, don't show up with answers. We've been in this for years and we don't have all the answers. We have some answers, I think.
Yes, but still learning every day.
Right. And so I talk about like carrying my bag of questions everywhere I go. So take that bag of questions everywhere you go and start asking different questions. There's a great quote by, I posted about this recently too, Dr. Dafina Lazarus Stewart. I hope I got that right. But it's basically like diversity asks this question, equity asks this question, right? Inclusion asks this question, justice asks this question. And I use that quote a lot in my workshops because I'm like, I've given you all these frameworks and tools, but if nothing else, take this quote and start asking these questions everywhere you find yourself as a starting point.
I love that. I'm not sure if you shared it on your LinkedIn or not, but I do know that in the chat, we shared your LinkedIn because it sounds like something that we all could gain value by seeing. I often say that I think just as society, we tend to make more definitive statements than we do ask very thoughtful questions. And so I love that amplification of this curious nature that I think that we all should be showing up with in every space, so that we are always learning and we're always listening, and we're listening to learn and not just to be able to respond. That's so incredibly important. Okay, so I want to go to the next question. Why is it important to integrate DEI into traditional management and leadership development training? And how do you do that within your organization?
Ooh, okay, this is one of my favorite topics to talk about, because again, if you start asking certain questions about the traditional management training or leadership development trainings, you start to realize how limited those trainings and those programs really are. And so in preparation for this question, I have a change management certificate from Cornell, like the Cornell graduate program or whatever that is. So I was like, I wonder what their leadership training program topics are. I can use that and riff off of that, right? And this is not a dig on Cornell. I haven't taken the leadership certificate courses. Maybe they weave in equity and justice themes into those trainings. I have no idea. If they do, great. If they don't, then they should, which is the whole the whole point of this stance, right? And so when you think about, let's take communication, for example. This is one. It was on their list. You know, executive communication. You know, communication, inclusive, not inclusive. Communicating for effectiveness. You know, all of these topics, right? But I have never seen or been in, and I've been in a lot of, as a manager and an organizational leader, I've taken a lot of these trainings. I've never seen any of these trainings talk about microaggression, verbal microaggression, and when that happens at work, and how as a leader to hear it, because I know what it is, right? Because I have a lived experience, but if you don't, you might not even catch that. Someone just said something that's a microaggression in the middle of delegating a task or discussing a project or discussing a client, right? So if you're having a communication course or a lesson where you're not talking about microaggression, right? You're not talking about cultural differences in communication. You're not talking about neurodiversity and how people communicate differently, even like for that, from that perspective, then what are we really talking about? The range of communication is this wide, and you've only like given us a slice out of all the different things that show up in our communication in the way that we relate to one another. And so that's just an example of like, I want to see management trainings and leadership trainings that after we get through giving and receiving feedback and delegating tasks and all these other topics, first of all, equity and justice and microaggression and all these other themes should be woven into all of that as appropriate. But I would like to see them also get some shine. And let's talk about what does that look like so that leaders are actually prepared to hear and then respond. Because what you're doing, which is the case with just equity in general, like equity in the workplace in general, is there's like a hidden, you know, sort of, what is it, puppet master, you know, just sort of like sabotaging you and you don't even realize it. You're like, oh, well, I had that conversation with so-and-so. I was talking to a client recently that said, our leaders, who are mostly white, are not giving feedback to their people, to their staff, their direct reports of color, because the organization started talking about equity issues. I was like, what? What?
Yeah. This is so common for me. This is so commonplace for me. So it resonates because I hear that a lot as well. And what I appreciate about what you're sharing, Olanike, is that, we started this conversation thinking about leadership training, traditional management training. If you are a people leader, and especially if you are in that C-suite level of leadership, where you really are setting the tone and ensuring that the systems and the policies and the practices are conducive for everyone to have full opportunity for success, then when it comes to that leadership management training, and I use the quotation marks there because those in this community know that I talk about this quite often. I don't like the word training. I think it sounds like a destination. It's more about learning and development experiences that are ongoing and we're continuing to build. But let's just use training for the sake of this conversation. Then I love the reframe of, instead of us always trying to label DEI training or learning and development as DEI training or learning and development, it's just leadership, right? It's just leadership.
It is.
Yes.
It is. So it's just taking your leadership from siloed to expansive.
I get so excited when a call comes through or inquiry comes through, and the ask is, we're doing a leadership retreat or a leadership special opportunity for training and learning and development, and we want to make sure that DEI is threaded throughout the whole day, the whole experience. That is music to my ears because the first thing it says to me is, you get it.
Yes.
Yeah, so I appreciate what you're sharing. Something else that struck me is when you said that a number of your experience has been that there's some leaders who will refuse to provide that constructive feedback to direct reports that are maybe professionals of color. And I hear that a lot. I even hear trepidation among individuals that may be a sponsor, like a formal sponsor or even a mentor to people of color, because they fear that if I really am constructive and I provide the useful feedback, it may come across as maybe now is steeped in bias, or that I'm, discriminating. And so they shy away. And then guess what happens? They don't provide any feedback at all. And then it perpetuates the cycle of people being stuck and not having these opportunities for upward mobility. And so we have to address that. What is the way in which you help coach and counsel your clients that may bring that type of challenge to you? What should those leaders do to get themselves more comfortable to be able to provide that great constructive feedback and coaching and mentorship to persons of color?
To embrace messing up.
That's good. Yeah.
If you're someone who hasn't lived in a multicultural setting, and now you're in the workplace, which is oftentimes where it happens, maybe sometimes in school, in college, but you get to the workplace, you move to, a big city, and it's like, whoa. So maybe you don't have practice, with cross-cultural, like cross-racial, cross-identity, conversation with people. And so you might be in this role where you're given feedback as a manager or as a mentor, and you're afraid that you're going to mess up. Figure out what to do when the mess up happens, right?
Yes.
That's the only thing. And what I tell people when I'm coaching people, managers or direct reports, is whenever you're first building a relationship with one another, a manager and a direct report, have a conversation about your relationship. Talk about the best manager you've ever had, the best direct report you've ever had. What did you like about them? Because once you start having that conversation, you'll be able to learn how they like to hear good news, how they like to hear bad news, how they like to celebrate, how they don't like to celebrate, how do they like to receive. You learn all of these things. And if that is a scenario where you feel like, because you're holding different identities, racial or otherwise, and that might be a dynamic, name it and talk about it in a way that says, hey, I just want to, build some trust here as we continue to have this mentorship relationship or whatever, and say that I'm going to give you some feedback, and I'm hesitant that some of that feedback may come across biased. And it might be. Frankly, your feedback might be biased, or because we work in the society and, you know, in a white dominant culture in our workplaces or whatever, the advice that you're giving someone to succeed might actually be biased, but that might be the thing that it requires to excel in that environment. So if you're able to tease out those elements and say, this is what it's going to require for you to move to the next level here, but is that good for you? Like, think about whether or not that's what you need, because maybe what we need to be talking about is how to get you out of this workplace, wink, wink, and get you in a safer environment. Like the best mentors and leaders that I've had have been able to care about me and my development first, right? And if they were able to help me within a particular organization, and we could have conversation about how messed up some of the things are here, but we know we have to play the game to climb the ladder. Like that's rich mentoring, right? That's the kind of mentor and sponsor that I want to have. That's like, I see you. I see the struggles that you're having here. I want to help you with that. I see the struggles that you're gonna have, and we can talk about that.
I love that.
And I might mess up and step in it sometimes. Call me on it, and let's talk about what we're gonna do when that happens.
You know, that permission to have that two-way conversation to make sure that the relationship is effective in reaching the ultimate goals that both parties seek. And so I love that. And it's like you said, you know, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Don't be afraid to get it wrong. But I think it's all about how we respond when we, you know, those behaviors or those actions are called in. We have to fall forward. What are you going to do now to make sure you are course correcting for the future? And so that's such sage advice that you shared with us. Yeah. So I want to talk now about your global experience in childhood. How has your global experience shaped how you view the DEI work and how in which you serve all of the clients that you have the privilege of working with?
Yeah, I think so. I remember the first white person that I ever saw. I mean, I don't remember their name or anything.
But you remember the experience, yeah.
I remember the experience. I was standing in front of my house playing with friends, and this guy walked by, and this was in Nigeria. I was just like, whoa, wait a minute. They make them like this, you know, like that in my 6-year-old mind. I was just like stunned, right? And so that's the background. You know, I was born in the States, but I have no memory of that, obviously. I was 2 years old when we left. So being raised in a country where everyone looked like me and having that very specific memory of like the first white person that I saw, just tells you like how I didn't have to think about, like, I was a girl, I was a tomboy, I was getting in trouble all the time because I couldn't keep my mouth quiet, like shut. I couldn't be seen and not heard and all that. But I would have never told you that I was Black, right? Because it wasn't a thing in my consciousness being in Nigeria. The faces on the billboards look like mine. The faces on the money look like me, right? Now, fast forward 30, 40 years to now, colonialism and the impact of that is definitely very present. And my adult eyes can see that, even though we're not all Black, but you know, most people here are Black. But as a child, I didn't have any of that in my awareness. And so moving to the US when I was 10, and then moving into like, you know, adolescent development phases and all of that, and being in different pockets of American culture, I was literally, so like I told you before, when I entered my home, I was Nigerian, but we also had like a Nigerian fellowship group. So all the Nigerians in Cincinnati gather and still do and have an organization. I attended a predominantly like 99.9% white church for a while because my dad and the pastor got very close. And we're still actually very close with that pastor and his family. But then my elementary school principal was like Afrocentric Black woman, and we got very, very close with that family. So we would go spend Thanksgiving at this traditional Black family, like in the Black neighborhood. We all actually also switched churches and ended up going to Black church. So like my experience is literally, I live at the intersection of difference. Like my whole life has been in this space. And also just moving into a new culture as a 10-year-old, you know, 5th and 6th grade and middle school. I was very comfortable, and I don't have a concept of like who was popular in Nigeria, but I was fine. Like it wasn't a thought. I wasn't on the margins. I came to the US and I was on the margins. Like, it was like, okay, you know, my personality changed. I became a lot more introverted over time. I became very increasingly observant about what was happening around me. There were a lot of experiences that I didn't have language for that I have language for now. And so all of this experience just kind of cultivated in me always feeling like I wanted to fight for the underdog, right? And so as I went to college and got into my career, that's what it was all about. You know, I was majoring in business marketing, and my senior year, I was like, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to go change the world. So I did an AmeriCorps program in DC, and I ended up spending the biggest chunk of my career in the nonprofit space. And then the last little stint of it before my consulting work was back in corporate. So
no, great.
it definitely has shaped my perspective. My personal life experience is why I'm here today doing this.
You mentioned AmeriCorps, and I have a lot of fun experiences working with AmeriCorps Vistas, and so I appreciate that.
Oh, really? Oh, so
conversation.
Cool.
Yeah. So you said something ago that I think should make its way to a T-shirt. So I'm going to ask someone to put it into the chat, but because somebody make this T-shirt. Live at the intersection of difference. Live at the intersection of difference. You know, as you were talking about, you said, I live at the intersection of difference, and you were going through all these different scenarios and experiences. I think that that's what helps us to build that cultural intelligence and that cultural humility, and to be so much more open to human difference. And so I believe that everybody should have that as their mantra. Yeah, live at the intersection of difference. So I love that. So my colleague has placed into the chat that we're soon going to turn to your questions. And I want you to know that we have a couple ways in which we're going to do that. For those of you who are feeling emboldened to ask your question live, we would love for you to be able just to raise your hand, and we will call on you, and we will spotlight you and allow you to unmute yourself and to share. But if you are here just in an auditory capacity and you prefer to place your question into the chat, you can do that as well. And we will make sure that we bring that to the conversation. So I'm going to go to one more question before I will open it up to see if the audience has questions. And if not, y'all know I have many more questions because I'm really enjoying this conversation. But I want to talk about belonging. I am big on centering belonging in this broad conversation of equity and inclusion, because it really truly is the outcome. And this audience has heard me say time and time again that it is hard for any person to show up at their best in any environment if they are always questioning whether or not they belong. So I believe in belongingness, and I know that you do as well. I understand, Olanike, that you have a belonging survey, and there's a tool and a service that you are going to be launching relatively soon. And I want this audience to have the ability to understand what this is designed to do. And so please share with us.
Yes. So when I was working 9 to 5 in my day job and working 5 to 9 on Mosaic for a while before I went full time with my business, as many consultants do.
Yes.
And when I went full time, and started doing equity work in organizations from the outside, I call myself an internal consultant. Before then, I became an external consultant. I found that I could not find a belonging survey tool that gave me what I needed. I needed a tool that was grounded in research, not just let's put these 20 questions together, because 20 questions together about equity and belonging will tell you something,
right?
But I didn't just want to gather information for information's sake. I wanted to know exactly what it is that this information will tell me based on what we know about our workplaces, about organizational design, about human psychology, and human behavior, all of that. So I basically built a framework and then I designed a survey based on that framework for myself that had 4 primary dimensions and then a 5th dimension that was really about culture and climate. And this is what I've been using in our audits as part of our bigger packages. So when we do a full workplace equity audit, we're looking at the systems, the policies, procedures, and practices in a workplace. We're looking at HR, personnel, people, whatever you call it at your job. We're looking at that HR function And what are the policies? What are the practices? What are the tools that you're using? So we're looking at the bones of the organization, but we're also gathering information from the people that work there about how they feel, what are their experiences. And we're doing that across like 10 to 15 different identity markers so that we can disaggregate the data and say, we're seeing gaps that are bigger with this people group versus this people group. We can do intersectional analysis. Like, it's amazing, you know, to toot my own horn a little bit. And everything I saw online was just like, so I was like a mad scientist, like, what can I research? I read all the studies and I created this thing. And it finally dawned on me last year that if I just take out that belonging survey part, it could be useful to other consultants like me or DEI leaders that are inside of organizations trying to figure out where to start. You know, everyone wants to start with unconscious bias training.
Yeah, I love that. It didn't exist. You saw a need for it. You created it. So I would love to talk offline with you further about that, because I do think it could be an incredible tool. And so keep us posted. We want to once it's available and it launches, we would love to.
We're wrapping it up. Right now, I have my team is working on it. I have a data analyst that would do the analysis and the reporting. And so if you're a consultant inside or outside of a workplace, you'll get access to the survey for your people. The other benefit of having an outside tool is your people can be more honest. We are GDPR compliant. So if you're a global organization, I have a data privacy lawyer. We got that. We're on top of that. And you can get a report that gives you real information. So beyond the 5 dimensions that I mentioned, there are different aspects that we can drill down into. And then there are different layers. We can look at manager perceptions, leadership perceptions, HR, it's just really robust. And so please sign up on, get on the website and sign up for our newsletter, because once we launch it, we'll definitely send out an announcement.
Yep. And if we haven't already, I'm sure that the team is working on placing your website into the chat so we can have that. One of the biggest things that you said for me, which I was sold from the beginning, was disaggregation. I think that's a step that so many people miss. It's not enough to look at just the aggregated totals, because it tells a different story once you disaggregate it by certain community groups and populations. And so
that is the story.
That is the story. We're speaking that research language. And so that definitely resonated with me. Okay, so now it's time for our audience. If you have a question right now, feel free to raise your hand, or maybe just go ahead and unmute yourself. Ursula, I see your hand is up, so I'm going to spotlight you. Thank you so much. Feel free to unmute yourself and share.
Yeah, so good morning, everyone. Hi, Dr. Nika and Olanike. I'm so excited to be here. I do have a question. So how do you help an organization realize that although they appear inclusive and diverse with different social groups, that is not directly reflected in their leadership roles? So our seniors, directors, executives, VPs, they're all one color. And they think they're either white men or white women, and they think the diversity piece would be because there's women on the board. That's where they highlight the diversity piece. So how do you have that discussion to bring that forth to let them know that it's not maybe as diverse as they think that it is?
Yeah, great question. There's a meme that was circulating online a while ago that's like, a company says they're diverse, but everybody at the top looks the same, with like one woman that's white, and all the diversity is at the bottom. Hierarchy, the bottom levels, of the leadership level hierarchy. I think they know, but they know that that's not real diversity, because we all understand how power works, power dynamics. So if you're not sharing power, which means your leadership levels are also diverse, not just at the 10,000 foot view, but like once we drill down into the layers of leadership, power sits in management, right, and leadership, and senior directors and directors, and the CEO and C-suite is one level, but then the board is the next level up, whether you're a nonprofit or in business, right? So, or corporate. So I think people know what they're doing, even if they're not articulating it. And a lot of times I see leaders who don't know what to say because they're like, well, no one is quitting and no one is retiring. And are you saying that we should fire people? Like, how are we going to get it more diverse up here? And the conversation I usually have with them is, well, you can do it. There's a lot that you can do to look at the trajectory of careers of folks inside your organization. There's a lot that you can do to look at where people are falling off and why that's happening. If there's an issue, I was working somewhere, I don't want to call them out explicitly, but there was a pipeline survey that we did. And basically we were able to figure out to the level in the leadership organization where all the people of color were falling off, like 95%. Right? It's like, what's happening there? So now we can look at what are the processes and procedures for promotion, right? Who's deciding who gets past that level? And what kind of resource, how do we need to resource them? How do we need to equip them, train them, coach them, give them different processes to follow? How do we need to hold them accountable? Because something is happening at this level that is keeping people from being able to move up and impacting our diversity. This was for an organization that actually had folks across racial groups and gender, that it was a race and gender study, that were moving up and then leaving to get into higher ranks of leadership. And I was like, what's going on here? And so that can be helpful because then with that kind of exercise, they can have specific strategies to try to address the problem. So there are things that you can do systems wise to find out what's happening, to find out the data, the information, and then address it. But there's also mindset work that has to happen. And that's where it's kind of like depends on who the power brokers are, right? And if they're really ready to share power or if they're all talk and no walk. That's a whole nother.
No, I'd like to lean in. I love your commentary, Olanike, and thank you so much for the question, Ursula. I'd like to lean into that a little bit more because what I would add is when you set the mindset, that really struck me because I think that first and foremost, we have to help them to see that if they are an organization that really is committed to deepening their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, while optics is not everything, optics certainly matters because your credibility becomes placed into question if people cannot see evidence that you are exercising rigor and due diligence around trying to create opportunities whereby there could be good representation of different demographics within your leadership levels. And so it does become a situation and a conversation of how are you prioritizing the representation that's missing from your organization, including your key senior levels in the organization. So a really important conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Ursula.
Thank you, Ursula. I appreciate that. Okay, we have time for more questions. Who else would like to present a question right now? Feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand so I can call on you and spotlight you. Okay, so we're watching the chat as well. And so if you're still thinking about the question or the contributions you would like to make to this discussion, then we will circle back to that in just a second. I want to go to another question now, Olanike. And so this is a question that may be a little unconventional from perhaps what you are used to speaking on, but I think we need to go there. Can you explain the paradox that you experience when helping workplaces to get better around their lack of intentionality for diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, while also through this knowledge of the organization, feeling this strong urge and need to want to liberate some of their people from the workplace? That is
get out moment. Get out.
Yes, exactly. Your get out moment. Let's talk about the paradox of that.
Yes, it's rough. It's rough because as a business, right? And I've contracted with the workplace, with the company. Granted, they know that I'm going to speak truth to power. Like I'm going to say the thing and you're not going to censor me and all. And like, that's clear. But then there's a thick line between that and saying, quit your job. They're not going to do right. Like that's just, not doing that. Right. But I've had those moments, right. Where I'm like, there's an employee that's confiding
Yes.
in me about their leader, and they're telling us what's going on. I'm like, oh my God, like what?
Yeah.
Okay. I feel like they probably can read between the lines, like this is bad. But it's hard. And so I'm actually, I think I touched on this a little bit when I was talking about mentoring earlier, like someone who can mentor you and care about you above all.
Absolutely.
Right. And so I'm getting into the space now where just in life where I feel like depending on where the organization is, where they are in terms of their maturity with doing equity work in their workplace, that work is not always for the people that are in there right now today.
Right. Right.
You know, that you're planting seeds. I use like gardening and nature analogies a lot. You're planting seeds, or maybe you're still like tilling the ground and preparing, figuring out like where you're going to plant the seed. And then you're going to plant some seeds, and then you got to figure out how much to water it and what you need to do to prune whatever it is that you're, you know, the plant or whatever it, like there is a whole process, and you know, your labor might not yield fruit for another 5 years. Right. You may still continue to see that high turnover rate or low retention, whatever way you're tracking those numbers on your staff, with your staff of color, because it's too late for the people that work for you right now. And I care about them as individuals being healthy and whole, and not to, you know, continue to be harmed by an organization that it doesn't know how to protect them above all. And so that's the paradox. It's kind of like, they're not going to get it right in the next 6 months or year. Like this is long-term work. Right. And the company or the organization, if it's a nonprofit, can be doing everything you can. But if you're on the line and you're a leader in an organization and you're doing everything you can and people are still leaving, that's okay. They need to care for themselves. They need to take care of themselves and their mental health and be whole. You keep doing the work that you're doing, because it will make a difference. You just have to give it time.
No, absolutely. You have to give it time. Yes, sometimes we're just watering seeds. Sometimes it's not us to see it to its full maturation, right? We have to be okay with that and know that the work that we have done that moved it from point A to point B is still sufficient. And so I so appreciate that. I had someone to tell me early in my DEI career that if you're really doing this work well, especially if you're working within an organization, that typically around the 5-year mark is where you should start to feel like, do I need to explore what's next? Because usually around that 5th year mark, you have planted so many seeds that you have a sense of what could be from a future perspective. And because typically by that point, you've ruffled enough feathers respectfully to where you may need to move on. Because again, to your point, for those of us that really care deeply about this work, we're not about diluting the work. We are going to speak truth to power. And I think that's so critical. So I want to talk about your TED Talk. Right? I'm not seeing any hands raised, so I'm gonna keep going in these last few minutes. But if you do have a question, raise that hand. But I want to talk about your TED Talk, because it was very provocative. It was great, and it was about you being tired of basically diversity and inclusion. And you talked about how it has been hampered by whiteness and the big lie. So I want you to give us a little bit of premise of those sentiments and really the core message of that TED Talk.
Yeah, the thing that I realized is I kind of came in like, everybody wants, you know, equity and inclusion, right? Like, kumbaya, my lord. We're all going to get together and hold hands around the bonfire and it's all going to be great. In my youth, when I've been doing this work without calling it D&I, right? Ever since, because again, my life story, like this is just where I was drawn to advocate for anyone that I felt was marginalized wherever I was from the beginning of my career. And so, the talk was really about reminding people that whiteness was a creation. It's not a thing, it's a construct, right? Is. And it was designed and marketed. Whiteness literally had a PR team of pseudoscientists and pseudo, psychologists that were writing books, and, the newspapers were printing things, to make a case for whiteness. And then there was this game of, who could be white. There was a time when Irish people weren't white, they were in the ghetto with the Black folks. Like they weren't accepted into whiteness either. Italians, like, right? And now in my mind, for anyone that's younger than me, you're probably like, what? What does that mean? That goes to show you that whiteness is fake. Racial classification is fake, right? It's not a real thing, but the impact of it, because of that PR team, because of that marketing team, because of that sales job that they did when they told the lie that white was great, right? And better, like white is right. The impact of it is what we have to live with now. And so it's really important. Sometimes when I want to be really provocative, when I'm talking to people, to somebody that is presenting white or identifies as white, I'm like, you're not white. And they're like, what? I'm like, you're not white. And they're like, what are you talking about? Like, what? And then we can get into that conversation, right? Like you are something else, right? You are Italian, Irish, like whatever. And there's some, white folks deemed as white folks that still are in touch with their heritage more so than others, but that's another conversation. So that's what the talk was about. The talk was about identifying that, giving a little bit of a history lesson about why whiteness was created. It was for power, right? It was for power building and wealth building. If we, all the people that we're oppressing across race, across racial groups are starting to unite against the man, against the power structure. How can we divide and conquer? Let's give some people access to whiteness, which at a time that meant you could vote, that meant you could have land, not to talk about the social ills that were happening, right, to people of color, but legally it meant something. It provided you perks and benefits that you did not otherwise have. Right. And so that's really what the talk was like. I was trying to shine a light on that, and to talk about how we really need to think about D&I work beyond just diversity and inclusion. What we need to be talking about is equity. What we need to be talking about really is justice, right? Like, let's acknowledge all this history and all the intention and intelligence, right, that went behind this lie to get us to where we are today, so that we can really tackle it.
Oh, that's so powerful. Historical context does have a place in this conversation today, whether people want to go there or not, it does. And we have to be willing to bring that to the conversation. You can't talk about equity without talking about power, and without talking about whiteness, and without talking about privilege. And so as uncomfortable as it may be for certain people, we have to go there. I placed in the chat, whiteness has a PR team, but as you said, whiteness has a PR team, a marketing team, a sales team.
A whole institution, y'all. Like,
yes,
yeah,
absolutely. That really resonated. And so thank you. Okay, so we're running out of time. I have one final question, and then I'm going to give you the final words to close us out in whatever way that feels appropriate. But we've talked about your TED Talk, and also if the team can place your TED Talk into the chat for this community, I think that will be very useful. And then we've talked about your belonging survey report and tool and service that's coming out. You also have a podcast, and it's entitled "So You Want to Be an Ally." So tell us about that.
Yes. Season 1, not sure when season 2 is coming out because life is lifing. But a good friend of mine, we were actually college roommates and post-college roommates for a little while, Dr. Davis, good wine, she just got married. And I have these conversations all the time. Like, this is just like, girl, what happened? And we were like, we should do a podcast. Like, let's talk about this. Because what would happen is I would come at the conversation from my like DEI consulting lens, and she's a psychologist, and she's the one that said a microaggression is racial trauma, it's abuse. And I was like, well, say more. And she was like, well, this is what we talk about when we're talking about abuse and trauma. How is that different from what's happening to us? Like, we were just having these conversations on the phone while we were talking about, our kids and our husbands and everything else. And we're like, we should do a podcast. So that's what it is. It's very conversational. We didn't do like a ton of editing and polishing because we wanted it to feel like you're eavesdropping on two girlfriends having conversations about these topics, which is what it is. And so season 1, I think we have 8 or 10 episodes. We do have 2 episodes on microaggression, if that's a topic that you're interested in. We talk about like the invisibility of Black women. We talk about raising children She's got a son, I've got a daughter. They're actually pretty close in age. And so we've gone through like, how do we prepare them for the world that they're going to meet, and what are the differences between raising her son and my daughter, and like, so you get to listen in on that. And so that's what that
Love
is.
it. So you want to be
Yeah.
an ally. So the link is in the chat. We hope that you all will check that out, all the episodes that are out there. And because this conversation was just so amazing and insightful, we're going to keep our fingers crossed that maybe a part 2 of the podcast is going to be released at some point. So no pressure. All right, we're at the top of the hour. I have so enjoyed this conversation. Thank you all so much for joining us, for being a part of this community. If you found this to be valuable, then certainly share it out with others. I want to close by giving you the final space to share whatever is coming up for you that you want to leave this audience with. Olanike, thanks for being here with us.
Thank you for having me. I think I'll just close by saying that having recently, my husband is Ghanaian, and having recently moved back to the continent and to Ghana, I'm really just reminded, even more so than I think when I was living everyday life in the States, how much white supremacy and how colonialism here on the continent has played out, and how I always talk about, just because of my life experience, how inequity and injustice is a global issue, but living here in the day-to-day and seeing how it shows up here, even when most of us look like me, it's just like, wow, like they really did a number on the planet. And so I just want to remind everyone, and I'm talking to everyone, that it really is a human issue. It's about power and dominance, right? And so in whatever ways that you can show up again in your sphere of influence or control, in increasingly equitable ways, which usually means sharing power, opting out of fear and scarcity mindset, and sharing power and being in community and relationship with each other, and being open to learn and evolve, and always having that curious stance. If we all just did that, the world would be a better place. And I'm still hoping for that kumbaya world to happen. It's not gonna happen in my lifetime, I don't think. But I think there are enough of us now that are sort of realizing that we have to be intentional, and we can rebuild, we can dismantle systems and rebuild systems. People, human beings like us, like you and me, did this, right? We have the history, at least parts of the history, to know that this was an intentional effort. And so that means we can do something different. We can make a different choice. And so that's what I'm hoping to do in my life and in my work. And I just want to take the opportunity to like recruit more people to join the crew of, light bringers, and to like wherever you find yourself on the planet, Amsterdam, Atlanta. I saw Lexington. I went to college in Frankfurt. For whoever is on the line from Lexington, I went to KSU. So yeah, let's go out there and make a change.
Yeah, join the movement. Thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy your weekend, and we look forward to seeing you back here next Friday for Intentional Conversations VodCast. Bye-bye. Take good care.